Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special webinar put on today by the Be AgSafe and RailSmart webinar. I'm Laura Rance. I'm Vice President of Content for Glacier FarmMedia. And like many of us, I live in rural Canada, where we are well aware and well coached on the hazards of railway crossings, and yet accidents continue to happen. In fact, not long after I agreed to do this, there was an incident near where I live, and thankfully no one was killed. So I'm grateful and thankful for everyone here for joining us today. This is the second day of Canadian Agricultural Safety Week. And this is a campaign week where we have a public campaign held during the third week of March every year that focuses on the importance of following safe practices in agriculture. This year's campaign, Safe and Strong Farms, Lead and AgSafe Canada, is on until March 20th. If you'd like to learn more about Ag Safety Week, which is presented by Farm Credit Canada, please visit agsafetyweek.ca. That's agsafetyweek.ca. And I'd like to offer a special shout out to CN for sponsoring this webinar and bringing us all together to discuss rail safety. Today, we'll hear from rail and safety experts about the safe and smart behaviors around rural railways. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. This webinar is being translated into French. To access the French translation, please click on the globe symbol, which if you are on a computer should be at the bottom of your screen. From there, you'll be able to select the French audio. Live transcription is also available. You can access this by clicking the Live Transcript tab. If you're using a mobile app, this is controlled under the app settings. Note that the live transcription is only available in English. Following our three speakers, there will be time for a question and answers. Throughout the webinar, if you have a question and you'd like to be one or all of our speakers to answer, please click on the Q&A symbol also at the bottom of your screen on the computer and type your question in there. So with that, we'll get started with our first speaker. I'm pleased to introduce David Thorne, who's an inspector with the Prairie Division of the CN Police Service. David joined the CN team in May 2018 as the divisional inspector for the prairies. Prior to joining CN, he spent 24 years with the RCMP in Quebec, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. He has extensive experience in leading operational and administrative police teams. Before retiring in 2015, David was seconded to the province of Manitoba, acting as the police services consultant for the Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Manitoba. Today, he uses his vast police experience to promote a safe and secure network at CN. He's a proud railroader and a policeman. Thanks for joining us today, David.
Thank you very much, Laura. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with everybody today, and honored to be a presenter during Ag Safety Week. Just to give you a little bit of a rundown of what I'm going to go through today, I'm going to talk on a high level of what happens across the network, give you some statistics and some basic rail safety facts, then go down into more of a smaller level, a regional level. I cover the prairies, talk a little bit about what we see on our system, and then go into a case study that I think you'll find very interesting. So without further ado, last year in North America, there was over 3,400 collisions with trains, resulting in 2,200 serious injuries or fatalities. And that's way too many. Here at CN, rail safety is a core value, plain and simple. CN and the CN Police wants to be part of an effort to minimize the risk of accidents at rail crossings. You know, to give you some small facts, a motorist is 40 times more likely to die in a collision with a train than any other vehicle. Approximately 60% of the collisions that we deal with occur at crossings with active warning devices. And then the majority of our collisions occur when the train is traveling less than 50 kilometers an hour. From just that basic rail facts, what I can tell you is absolutely all accidents involving trains are 100% completely avoidable. The only safe and legal place for pedestrians to cross train tracks is at a designated rail crossing. Vehicles should never drive around or under a lowered crossing gate arm, and they must make sure to stop no closer than 5 meters away from the nearest rail. Drivers should never, ever stop on tracks, even for that brief red light where you don't see a train coming. You should only ever proceed across railway tracks when you can ensure that they're completely clear without stopping. Remember, as I said before, the train is much wider than the tracks on both sides. So being alert is the first thing you can do. Being alert when approaching a railway crossing, whether it's the first time you've crossed it today, or with many of my farmer colleagues, the 40th time, especially during harvest, you come up to a railway crossing. Please don't be distracted by electronic devices, cell phones, radios, or even other people in the vehicle for any reason. It's imperative that you obey all railway signs, warning devices, gates, lights, bells, and know that trains can come from at any time, from any direction, and on any track. A lot of our track and crossings have multiple train tracks of not only one, but up to 3 or 4 train tracks at a crossing. And the biggest thing I wanted to get across to everybody today is trains run on different schedules all the time. So I like to think, train time is any time is train time. So although trains sound their whistles at most crossings, I want people to be aware of that in some places, according to bylaws, there's quiet zones in place where bells are being rung and the active crossings are going. So stopping for those active crossings is most imperative. Another fact that I was really surprised when I joined the railroad was the weight ratio of a car to a train is 4,000 to 1, which is comparable to a pop can being compared to a car. I like to tell everybody trains are big and trains are heavy, and I think we're all aware of that, but trains are also very fast and they're also very quiet nowadays. The average stopping distance of a train traveling, say, at 90 kilometers an hour is 1,850 meters. Now, what is 1,850 meters in layman's terms? Picture 18 football fields. And for that, I want to tell you that trains cannot stop on a dime. Now, in Canada last year, there was 123 accidents on CN tracks involving either vehicles or people. 82 of those accidents were at crossings, where 41 involved people trespassing on tracks. And the most common factors that we see on a yearly basis is people failing to stop at lights or stop signs at rail crossings. Second one is distracted driving with cell phones, texting, social media use while driving. We're finding that's creeping up to be a big causal factor in many of our collisions. The old one of impaired driving still has not gone away, although it's been around for decades. We still see people who choose to make bad choices from time to time get in accidents with trains. And of course, trespassing on the railway property. And many people think that, walking old Fido down the railway tracks is a peaceful way to, take your dog for a walk or have a nice wedding picture at a bridge or whatnot. But it's simply unsafe and needless. It's a big network that we police at CN. There's 73,000 kilometers of track in Canada, and there's 18,500 public highway or railway crossings. But you have to add on another 18,500 private crossings. And in Manitoba alone, our small little province, we have about 6,000 crossings. So what I'm trying to say, folks, is we can't do this alone. If you learn anything from today's webinar, is that rail safety is a shared responsibility between CN and its communities. Now, back in September of 2018, when I first came on the police force, I noticed a disturbing trend happening in Saskatchewan. CN trains had hit 5 professional drivers, primarily in the farming communities, in the first 9 months of the year. And of course, I wasn't happy with that. CN wasn't happy with that. So we developed a strategic plan by our officers to team up with representatives from grain elevators, trucking associations, professional driving schools to provide rail safety training to the professional drivers. Now, during that campaign, we visited over 42 grain elevators in Saskatchewan and talked with trucking associations in Manitoba and Saskatchewan, implementing rail safety training in their core driver training courses. What happened? Well, from January 2019 to November 2020, a span of 667 days, that's just shy of 2 years, folks, CN went without being involved in a single collision with a professional driver in Saskatchewan. Now, through extensive partnerships and with local stakeholders and the excellent assistance of our public affairs team at CN, the Prairie Division of CN Police has helped embed a safety culture within the communities that we live in and help create that network fluidity in the transportation of grain across the network. Now, since March 2020, we have further developed our professional driver strategy plan, and we've brought it into not only Saskatchewan this time, but into Manitoba, Northwestern Ontario, where we were seeing accidents with farmers. Making key partnerships with trucking associations, driver education training, and rail safety presentations on those key focused areas we've been able to spread the safety message in hopes of reducing accidents across our network. Now this year, I'm looking forward to a strong year in safety at CN. We've developed our grain safety plan for 2021. And that plan is going to include a 3-stage approach that will incorporate not only the electronic communication that we've all seen here. This is my first presentation via Zoom in being 30 years as a policeman. So this is something exciting and new to me, and that's something that we're going to tap into going forward. But we're going to hit all 21 elevators across Manitoba that are either on or near the CN network, as well as in-person visitations from CN police officers, speaking directly with the producers and the transportation people. And that's going to set the groundwork for providing a further reach of our safety message. Now, going that extra mile and speaking with the ag farm implement dealers, the commercial driving associations, that's going to continue to provide us the most up-to-date relevant safety information as possible. Engaging the farming community during Rail Safety Week at the end of September 2021, which coincidentally is right around harvest time. And coming from a farming background in my family, I know during harvest time, things are busy. You want to get the crop off as soon as possible. You work long hours and, there's a lot of tired people out there. But what I'm saying is we're going to work with the farming community just as a reminder to work safe around the rails during such a busy season. CN Police is going to engage the traditional print, but also social media, targeting specific high-risk areas along our network. And that's one way we're going to become a safer railway. Folks, if there's anything else I want you to take away from today's webinar, it's the goal of the CN Police Service, as well as CN, to have 0 collisions with our trains along our network. And we're going to achieve that by working with people like yourself, spreading that message to look, listen, and live. And that's the way we're going to achieve this goal. So with that said, I can't thank you enough for having me here today, and I look forward to taking your questions at a later time.
Thanks very much, David. And just a reminder, if anyone does have questions, they'd like to type them into the Q&A box, please do so, and we'll get to them after our speakers are finished. Our next speaker today is Rene Wigner, who's the Supervisor of Training and Compliance with the Kleysen Group, Limited. René grew up on a farm in southwestern Manitoba. Following his schooling, he spent 5 years working for a grain farmer in southern Manitoba, which involved working as a custom harvester in the US and Canada. He also hauled grain during the winter months, which is what eventually led him into the transportation industry. René began his career as a professional driver with Reimer Express Lines in 1977. From 1992 to 1997, he worked as a Class 1 instructor for the Reimer Driver Training Institute. In 1997, he transitioned back over to Reimer Express Lines Transportation Department, where he was involved in training and safety until 2014. In 2014, René was presented with an opportunity to join the Kleysen Group Limited Safety Department, focusing on driver training, compliance, and coaching for success. Thanks for joining us today, René.
Thank you, Laura. It's a pleasure to join the group here today. I'm certainly very passionate about safety and the transportation sector. And as David emphasized, rail safety is really an important part of everyone's life. I worked with many people over the years and found that it's important to understand our human nature and how we react to things. And of course, we all respond slightly differently. But as a whole, I find that individuals really have the best of intentions, but unfortunately, sometimes we put ourselves in harm's way. And probably some of the contributing factors, just the hustle and bustle of life's pressures today, of course, can be somewhat challenging. And we're trying to juggle all these demands, and sometimes we can lose our focus somewhat. So, as David mentioned, probably some of the main focuses or some of the main challenges today is really distractions, right? And we need to be careful. So whether it's simply technology in the vehicle we're driving, or whether it's a cell phone, a passenger, any one of these can be a distraction. So we need to be careful in these areas. The other part is society today seems to be expecting the average person to be able to multitask. And that can be very dangerous, especially when we look at defensive driving. The last thing you want to do is see someone multitasking. We want to really remain focused on what we're doing. Cell phone usage, for example, of course, the regulations stipulate that we can go hands-free using a Bluetooth device, and that's fine. As far as the regulation goes, but the unfortunate part, it doesn't remove that distraction part. It only frees up our hand, but it doesn't really, it only provides hands-free, but not brain-free ultimately. And some studies have been conducted when they measured a person's interaction during a telephone conversation. They found that the processing area of the brain that is able to process moving images would actually decrease by as much as 1/3 when listening or talking on the telephone. As well, this would contribute to a driver missing up to 50% of what's actually happening out front of the windshield. So that has really quite a huge, significant impact. And these are, some of the things we definitely always share with our drivers during training sessions. Just to add to that, we've all witnessed this. We catch up to a vehicle moving slower than the general traffic flow. And as you overtake the vehicle, you notice that the driver is engaged in a telephone conversation and normally, hopefully, hands-free. But unfortunately, the driver is not able to really divide their attention between two tasks simultaneously. Therefore, something has to give. And unfortunately, it's the driver's focus on the driving that usually is going to lose out. So keeping our eyes fixed on the job that we're doing is really important. Age-old saying, right? Eyes on the road, hands on the wheel, and mind on driving are really, really important aspects. Another area that's so important in professional driving, of course, the equipment we operate, it's huge, it's heavy, nowhere near compared to a train, of course, but still nevertheless can do some serious damage. Beginning your day with a proper, thorough pre-trip inspection according to National Safety Code Standard 13, Schedule 1. It provides us a good guide to ensure our equipment is safe. And throughout the day is when we have a chance, step out of the vehicle, do a walk around of the vehicle, do a quick circle check, just in case something has changed from your last inspection. One of the acronyms I like to emphasize during training is BLTs, and maybe our favorite sandwich in some cases. But in this case, we're referring to brakes, lights, tires, and suspensions. Just just over the years, we find these are kind of the hot spots where you're going to run into issues and malfunctions, usually in these general areas. Especially brakes, extremely important, because we're depending on the brakes to be able to stop that tractor trailer configuration or truck and trailer, whatever we're towing. And of course, they need to function properly. Depending on the age of equipment today, of course, anything built prior to or manufactured prior to October 20, 1994 would be equipped with manual slack adjusters. Anything after this date would be equipped with self-adjusting automatic slack adjusters. But nevertheless, we still need to check to ensure that they're functioning correctly and there's no malfunction. Just as a reminder, typical standard 30 brake chambers will allow a maximum of 2 inches of push rod travel, or if we're doing a free stroke check, it would provide a hand pull in equivalent to about a 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch maximum. So within these parameters, you'd be able to operate the vehicle safely, obviously. So that's important to check the equipment. Don't assume there's no other test that we can do other than a visual inspection to make sure our equipment is actually safe. And just one last note on brake adjustment is ensure that your push rod travel on any 2 chambers on the same axle set, it can't differ more than a 1/4 inch from the left to the right wheel. And that has to do with just stability and how the vehicle is going to react in a braking situation. So those are things we need to keep in mind, just as a reminder. The other is not getting into too big of a rush. And I see this with my guys as well. You get under the gun, you get under the pressure, and you're trying to, you take pride in meeting deadlines and providing the level of service, and that's great. We appreciate it, but we always have to remember one thing, is that we never want to sacrifice safety in any aspect of fulfilling our job. So that's important. Something we need to keep in mind as well is situational awareness, right? As David mentioned. It's highly recommended that when we're operating a vehicle, we should lead our vehicle by at least minimum 15 to 30 seconds. So we're looking ahead down the road to see what we can see, and of course scanning as we go, and looking for any telltale warning signs, especially railway crossings. So those we certainly want to be well aware of, and be prepared to react. If we know that the warning lights have activated, or we can see a train coming in the distance, so it's important to conduct a good scan well before you get there. Just to put some perspective into stopping distances and how speed will affect our stopping distance, for example. And we'll use miles per hour. I think everybody's familiar with that ratio. So at 30 miles an hour, for instance, we're traveling about 13 meters per second, in other words. Total stopping distance required at 30 miles an hour would require 100 feet or about 30 meters to stop our vehicle. This is 30 miles an hour, 48 kilometers an hour. If we simply just double that speed and increase it to 60 miles an hour, 96 kilometers an hour, we're now traveling 27 meters per second. Our stopping distance, you would think logically, right? If we just double our speed, well, everything else should just double. But unfortunately, it doesn't work that way in physics. Our stopping distance would increase from 100 feet to 426 feet, or from 30 meters to 129 meters, for example. So that has quite a profound impact on our ability to stop our vehicle. Now, this is just doubling speed. If you double your weight as well as your speed, so we're not only increasing our stopping distance by 4 times by just speed, but we're increasing it by another 4 times. So in total, we're increasing our total stopping distance here by 8 times when we double our speed as well as double our weight. One last note, it kind of seems to be the tipping point up in around 60 miles an hour. If you add another 5 miles per hour, another 8 kilometers an hour to that equation, you would think, well, it's only going to increase my stopping distance just a very small margin. But actually, we'll add another 100 feet to our stopping distance, or another 30 meters to the stopping distance, just by increasing by 5 miles an hour or 8 kilometers an hour. So those have substantial impacts. So it's important to recognize that, obviously. So if we're not looking well in advance, and we get caught off guard, and as a result, unfortunately, now it's physically impossible to stop our vehicle in time for the rail crossing. I'll share just a personal story back in the days when I was on the road, and just give you an idea how easily you can be caught in a situation. I was traveling through a small northern town in Ontario, And in that particular town, the rail ran parallel with the highway through the town. And of course, it was a few blocks away, so you couldn't see it. It was hidden by the development, of course, the housing. So I'm traveling through the town, reaching the end of town where the highway now swerves to the left, and there's a railway track coming up. So I'm coming along through it, and I'm so thankful I was taking my time. As I'm approaching the track, I look, and here's a freight train coming. Oh my goodness, the lights hadn't activated yet for whatever reason. And again, it's a good example why you never want to just stake your life on those warning lights. They can malfunction like any device, mechanical device. So of course, you immediately try to stop your tractor trailer. Conditions were slippery, and it was intense there for a few seconds, but finally managed to get stopped probably about 20-25 meters from the rail. And I'm looking up into the engineer's eyes. He's looking down into my eyes, and they're probably big as saucers at that point in time. And it was probably one of the most life-changing experiences for me, needless to say, how close that came to a major collision. So ultimately, it's so important that we just got to maintain that alertness, right? That situational awareness at all times. And again, don't push your luck, right? Take it easy. Many times, just by traveling at a reduced speed will make all the difference whether you're going to be able to respond in time and stop your vehicle to avoid a collision. And especially with a train, of course, that's the last thing we want to tangle up with, because we're going to lose, obviously. So we don't want to see that happen. So takeaways, of course. So the big thing here is realizing that, and as I tell my guys, is, we got to always think safety and recognize that, certain things cannot be undone. We don't get a second go at certain things. So it's so important that we get it right the first time. If we do that, you're certainly going to protect yourself. One last point I like to always stress with my guys is during training sessions is to look them in the eyes and say, of course, you're involved in safety, so you're expecting us to work safely for you. But no, the last thing I expect is someone to work safely for me or for their employer. But ultimately, who do you really want to work safely for? And that person would be for yourself and your family. They're expecting you to return home safely at the end of your workday. And of course, that's the most, huge benefit that we can certainly all appreciate and certainly want to be able to accomplish as a whole. So these are just a few things that certainly play a role and can certainly impact our safety. So bottom line is, focus on good habits. It doesn't take any more energy to focus on a good habit or a bad habit, but of course, good habits will certainly yield the benefits that we're looking for to keep yourself safe and everyone else safe. Thank you very much for this time. I appreciate it.
Thanks very much, Rene. So our final speaker this morning is Rob Gobeil, who's the Agricultural Health and Safety Specialist with the Canadian Agricultural Safety Association. CASA is a nonprofit organization with a vision of safe and sustainable agriculture where healthy Canadian communities live. Rob obtained his occupational health and safety certificate with honors from Red River Community College in 2007. Rob currently manages the Be Grain Safe program, course development, and other projects for the Canadian Agricultural Safety Association. He currently leads the National Provincial Partner Safety Leadership Panel and is a member of the Canadian Agricultural Systems Standards Oversight Committee, as well as a member of the Progressive Agriculture Foundation Safety Days Development Committee. Thanks for joining us today, Rob.
Thanks, Laura. Hello, everybody. For today's presentation, I would like to kind of put things to the context of the typical Canadian farmer. So farming in general, it's a very unique occupation due to many factors. To touch on some of them, many job tasks are performed throughout the day by farmers with a limited amount of time to complete them. Like David and Rene mentioned earlier, we touched on harvest time where it's go, go, go. There's a limited window to get that harvest in and get that product in your bins or get that product out to market. And, often manpower or human power is hard to come by. And again, time is of the essence. Many of these job tasks that producers perform are hazardous. And yes, definitely crossing a set of tracks with a vehicle or a piece of equipment can be one of these hazardous job tasks. I'll touch on that again later on. Some of these job hazards are beyond our control as well, such as weather or road conditions in the case of crossing railroad tracks. So there are several factors that can play into an incident on a set of tracks. Fatigue being one of them. Again, long hours are being worked at peak times of the year. Spring planting, fall harvest for the crop farmers out there, as well as the livestock industry. You know, you've got your peak times where there's the calving season, for example, and you're bringing your livestock to market as other peak times. So things we can do are try and get enough sleep where and when we can. But some things that are often overlooked is it's important to get enough food and stay hydrated throughout the day. And by getting enough food, also diet, whatever type of food you're eating plays into how alert you can be. The high sugar type foods, the grab a chocolate bar to get a quick energy rush, yes, that's great food to get a quick energy rush, or grab a cola or what have you, or a coffee, and that works. But it often leads to a little bit of a quick energy rush, but some burnout at the end. One tip I often provide is if you're feeling you're wanting to nod off while you're working, you know, it's better to stop what you're doing, pull over if you're driving, for example, pull over in a safe spot, and take a 15-minute cat nap if you need to. There's research behind that that proves a 15-minute nap can really improve your alertness and help prevent an incident from happening. With distractions and complacency, as the gentleman mentioned earlier, things such as cell phone or mobile device use on the road, often I'm guilty of it, less so now, but guilty of it back in the day. I was famous for playing music way too loud, often probably too loud to hear a horn from an oncoming train. One thing that we touch on at CASA as well is we always recommend that children are left out of the cab of a tractor. So that can provide a bit of a distraction on the road and in a piece of equipment. And the complacency, the typical, I've crossed here 1,000 times before and there has never been a train. As David mentioned earlier, the trains don't necessarily run on the same schedule. So sometimes that 3 o'clock train, yeah, it might be a 3 o'clock train, but they might be hauling a different load for a one-off kind of load at a different time. So you can never guarantee that the train is coming at an exact time. And again, we want to keep our thoughts on the task at hand. Stay alert. Next, we have equipment dimensions. Do we know how wide the equipment is? Do we know how wide the crossing is? We've all been on the highway at a controlled or uncontrolled crossing, and you've got the 2 posts up on the crossing, and is your equipment wide enough or narrow enough to pass through safely? Will it make contact with the crossing itself or some other obstacle? So we just want to know how wide and what our dimensions are at all times. Next, we have hitching and load securement. So do we know if we even have enough time to cross safely on the tracks? Often, some tracks may have some significant bumps midway through, we want to make sure that we allow enough time. Never try to beat a train across a set of tracks. Can you cross without leaving the tracks blocked? Often there's a hump in the tracks, and a low hanging trailer, for example, might get hung up on that set of tracks. So can you cross safely without blocking the tracks? Next is the right type of hitch pin being used. I know personally a lot of people aren't aware that there's certain types of hitch pins that need to be used on equipment. We can't just use a bolt through our hitch assembly because it might shear off, and then it could shear off if you get hung up on the tracks, and next thing you know, you're blocking the road or blocking the tracks. Next is the load secure so that nothing will be left on the tracks if you hit a bump. So we've got that scenario, your typical scenario of a farmer hauling a load of big round hay bales across the tracks. Is that load secure? Will you be losing some bales and leaving them blocking the tracks potentially, or rolling off into traffic as well? Next, we have new or inexperienced drivers. The operators of the equipment or semi-rig, what have you, they must be familiar and trained properly to use that equipment. They also need to be properly licensed while driving on public roads and follow the Highway Traffic Act regulations and laws. Also, as a side note, farm owners and employers need to ensure that their operators are competent on their equipment. They need to provide an orientation, and they need to identify, maybe as part of that orientation, it would be a good idea to identify regular crossings as part of that orientation process. As David mentioned earlier, we all have a role to play in safety in the workplace. I'll touch on the employer and worker or driver roles in this case. So employers have a basic duty to keep their workforce safe. That is Safety Laws 101, so to speak. Farm owners or employers need to ensure competency, provide that orientation, and again, it would be a good idea to identify those regular crossings. They need to provide a level of supervision and also an emergency plan. It would be a great idea, and it's very commonplace, to have some communication on board in a vehicle or a piece of equipment when they're away from the farm. So, you have your cell phone for emergency purposes only while you're operating a vehicle. Again, pull over if you need to use it. But often, going old school, we have our two-way radios in the rigs and in pieces of equipment potentially as well. Next, we need to ensure that the equipment is in safe working order and have a preventative maintenance plan in place, much like Rene mentioned earlier as well. Doing that circle check for the operator as well is key. Next, we have our workers and drivers. So again, we must be familiar with the equipment that we are using. Just because you've operated a tractor trailer or a certain type of tractor on the farm down the road doesn't mean you know how to operate the one you're sitting in right now. We want to perform that pre-use inspection or circle check before using the equipment, just to ensure that it's safe to use. And as a side note, if it is unsafe, it needs to be fixed in a timely fashion. Do not use it if it's unsafe. Again, we need to be properly licensed while driving on public roads, comply with the highway traffic laws, and operate within the load capacities of the equipment and the road as well. Spring road limitations, for example, there's weight limits on roads, and that's pretty commonplace in the rural areas. So what can we do to ensure safe crossings? Number one, typical safety guide advice, but we'd want to create and follow procedures for equipment operation and hitching. Next, we'd want to perform preventative maintenance and repairs as needed. Again, we want to stay alert. To use the CN tagline, we want to look, listen, and live. And again, slow down, don't rush. It's surprising how often in my experience as a safety professional, I end up telling the little kid tortoise and hare story. The tortoise wins every time. Also, lastly, just to sum it up, CASA has some available resources. So if you go on the CASA website at www.casa-acsa.ca, and you go under the resource tab, and you can go into the CASA Safety Shop Farm Safety Library, and you can search for the CASA Safe Implement Hitching Guide and several CASA toolbox talks. Some specific ones I'll mention are the general hitching and hauling, the hitching drawbar connection, the pre-operational inspection of equipment, towing large loads, transporting oversized loads, and working alone toolbox talks. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
Thanks very much, Rob. We do have some questions on the table, and I'm going to direct the first one to René. And it's really about truck safety, the best practices when driving close to heavy trucks, avoiding tailgating, the whole issue of driver blind spots and passing, etc. Do you have some basic tips for people on that front?
Yes, thank you, Laura. It's important when a motorist approaches a large commercial vehicle, probably one of the most important things to remember is to avoid the blind spots, as they asked. One way to look at it is, can you see the driver in his mirror or her mirror, right? Remember this, if you can't see them, they can't see you. And of course, if you're tucked in directly behind the commercial vehicle, they can't see you back there at all. They can see down the sides of their trailer, but they can't see directly behind. Other areas to avoid is next to the tandems on the trailer, for example. The driver can see you there, but nevertheless, it's a very dangerous place to be. You never know when a tire can blow or something can happen, and certainly will have a direct impact on the vehicle. Another is up near the front of the vehicle, right near the driver's door, the passenger's door, or just ahead of that as well, towards the front of the vehicle. You're entering into another blind spot here as well too. Or just around the drive wheels of the tractor, another blind spot. So the best thing to do is really just to avoid these areas, right? If it's safe to pass, you want to pass, then that's fine. If you're remaining to the rear, then stay well behind the vehicle so the operator can certainly see you. But don't get up close. If you're just putting yourself in a dangerous situation, and should something happen, there's no escape route ultimately. Thank you.
I'll direct this one to David. Is there a demographic of drivers that is most commonly involved in crossing incidents with trains?
No, not really. I know I referenced back in 2018, we saw an uptick in farm and professional drivers in that first 9 months, and that's why we wanted to concentrate it on. But we get all types. We get cars, we get bicycles, we've got trucks, we get professional drivers, we get amateur drivers. There's really no demographic that is more prone. I always say trains don't know who the driver is, and it's really up to the driver to look, listen, and live.
Another question I'll put out just for anyone to answer: is there a common location where most collisions between trains and vehicles occur?
I can take this as I said in my presentation. It's about a 2/3 ratio that's going to happen at a crossing. You can think of places that have high traffic density, and if it just takes one person not to be paying attention or be impaired, be on a cell phone, whatever, to go across and get struck. We do have crossings across our network that have just stop signs and crossbucks out in the more rural areas. We have collisions there as well, but we also have collisions where there's double gates, lights, bells going off, and people trying to beat the train by driving underneath the gates. So it can happen anywhere. I just say, you really got to pay attention when you're coming up to a train track.
So we're all aware that complacency is probably one of the biggest risk factors. I mean, what recommendations would you have for dealing with professional drivers, René, and with farmers, Rob, when with regards to rail crossings?
As for professional drivers, so the key here is to maintain your focus, and how do you avoid distractions? Well, you have to be aware to a certain degree, of course, that something is distracting you. Even just looking down the road and looking ahead, you can get caught in a distraction even doing that. And the rule of thumb is never let your eyes rest on anything for more than about 2 seconds. And then you need to keep your eyes moving, keep scanning the area around you. By doing that, you're allowing yourself to constantly update the information, and that's really key. Just like we update our cell phones and our computers, we need to update the information that we have out there. And the only way we can do that is by keeping our eyes moving. And the trick is that in a matter of a half a second, even 3/4 of a second, right, it can have a huge impact on just what has developed before you as a result. So it just takes practice, and we just got to remind ourselves to be able to maintain that focus and just to keep our eyes moving. It helps to keep you alert as well too, right? Because you're processing different images at the same time. So it's really a win-win situation. Thanks.
Yeah, and I agree 100% with René. Also, to expand on what René had mentioned earlier, slowing down ahead of time, well ahead of time, reinforcing those good habits, those good driving habits are a positive as well. Like any safety concept, preparation ahead of time. As you know, you're approaching a set of tracks. If you're in a tractor with implements, make sure they're tucked in before you're crossing. Make sure that, if there's certain controls that you need to operate to heighten the level of the equipment, do that beforehand. Don't wait till you're hung up. Don't wait till you're midstream to be looking at these things. So preparation is key.
So this is a related question, Rob, and it's just, and I think you partly covered this, but the top 3 things to consider when you're transporting a piece of farm equipment across a rail crossing.
Pretty much, yeah. Prepare, and prepare would be the top 3.
Who should I contact to report something that's unsafe? Not an emergency, but you see something at a crossing that indicates it could be a safety hazard. David, who would someone call about that?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So at every crossing, there's a blue sign attached to the crossbuck, and it'll give the location, the mile point, the subdivision, and then the CN emergency number is on that. Now it'll go to either operations or CN police service to shut that track down until it can be inspected. So I think that's probably the best. The 1-800 number has been the same number as long as I can remember, and that's 1-800-465-9239. Now that number I also put into the chat for anybody who is looking for it today. And the old adage for me is, if you can see the train coming, you're probably too late. So call right away if you get stuck or hung up or your load gets discharged on the crossing.
So, we know that train tracks are private property. What is considered trespassing, and what are the fines for people that do trespass on railway property?
Yeah, that's a good question, Laura. So all train tracks are right away. It's private property, that property of CN or the other railroad involved. It's under the Rail Safety Act is the authority, and the fine for trespassing in Manitoba is $220. So it does vary a little bit from province to province, but it's a significant issue. When I always go back to how many incidents we had in Canada last year involving trespassing alone, and 41 is way too many.
So we still have some work to do.
We have a lot of work to do together. We're a small group of police, and as I said, it's rail safety is a shared responsibility. It's shared with the communities, it's shared with the people on this call, and it's shared with the local governments, whether it's municipal, provincial, or federal. We all have a hand in it, and keeping people safe across our network is what's going to make the difference.
So with that, I just wanted to offer my thanks to you, David Thorne, and to Rene Wigner, and to Rob Gobeil for joining us today on this very special webinar for Be AgSafe and Rail Smart in conjunction with Canadian Agricultural Safety Week. Thanks very much to everyone for joining us, and please follow the advice that was here today, but also talk to your family and your friends about what you heard here today, because it could save a life. I'm Laura Rance. I'm Vice President of Content for Glacier FarmMedia, and thanks again for joining us today.